that discussion be concluded.
Entirely my own.
So then I'll come in. Thanks to Surinder, he has already started and taken care of a lot that I had to say. So that makes my job much more simpler and easier too. I would like to thank the organizer, in this case Center for West Asia Study, and Balgandar to extend this invitation to be part of this roundtable. And I would like to thank Punjab University Patiala for extending this invitation. The food security issue, which was is the core of the discussion in this roundtable, and as Professor Sidhu has already raised or put the agenda for us what we need to discuss. So one part is supply, demand and access, and the second one is identifying those who do not have even that much. That's the bare minimum, and that's where the poverty issue comes in. And what reminds me is that we are discussing it, the same issue at the 75%, which possibly was discussed exactly in the same way back at the time of formation of Indian National Congress in 1876. The small group which formed the Indian National Congress included a British, although a British parliamentarian, but he happened to be Indian, Sir Dadabhai Naoroji, and he had conducted a small study to find out about the deprivation level of Indians, the basic deprivation level, and that was food. And the yardstick that he used, unlike the kind of discussion that we have about poverty measurement today, that calorie and vector and this commodity, that group, he used a British jail manual for the food entitlement of prisoners, and concluded that about 70% to 75% of Indian households do not have that much to eat. So it's ironical that food security bill comes back with exactly the same number, or Sonia Gandhi's Congress now comes back with the same number, which is started something like 140, 150 years ago. And since then, this has been the core of the agenda, and there is one direction I can take is to take you through to what led to the deprivation of Indians within a span of 200-250 years, because during the Mughal period, the historical accounts and the historians as well as the officials that started coming from Britain, they argued that Indian households on an average were better than the Londoners at that point in time. That is one the direction one can take, and that's whole a lot of this political economy debate and how the rule of the game changed. I'm not going that route, but I'm going to take you through the power discussion related to poverty and how it became the core of the agenda of the Congress in the pre-independence period, and it was revived only in the early 60s in the post-independence period. Those of you who have had a chance to look through this book by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Discovery of India, on page, I think it's somewhere around 400, there is a detailed write-up about the development plan in that sense for India, which was based on the recommendation of the National Development Committee, which was headed by Mr. Saraiya. And they have talked about several issues, agriculture, industry, etc., etc. But what they have discussed, or what Nehru quotes, is one, appalling poverty levels in India are something that we need to address it immediately. Something like what calorie debate is coming today, in 1930s, 34 to be exact, if I remember correctly, in date. In 1934, this committee recommends that India needs 2400 to 2800 calories per workers, which is sufficient as a food energy for them, and that can be obtained, or that can be purchased, what they call irreducible minimum of something like 15 rupees at pre-war prices. And this was the basis of something what we are talking today. In fact, at a later stage, when the issue of poverty got revived in the 50s and to large part of 60s, there was not too much of discussion on poverty actually. It was only, and there was political and other geopolitical reasons for the problems with wars, emergencies, drought, and so on and so forth. But it was only in 70s that the first time when there was division in the Congress and Mrs. Gandhi came to the power, and she is the one who gave this slogan, Garibi Hatao. So it was nearly 100 years later that on the basis of which the Congress was formed, Mrs. Gandhi comes back, and Mrs. Indira Gandhi comes back with the slogan that we need to remove poverty now. And what has happened was this first time the setting up of a formal group, which is known as Task Force, in 1979 under the chairmanship of Vaikela. So Vaikela was the chair. No, first one was Vaikela.
Later on.
Task Force was
1979.
They submitted the report in 79, but the group was constituted 4 or 5 years earlier than that.
73.
Yeah, 73, 74, and they estimated the poverty line that could provide something like 2400 to 435 calories, to be exact what the task force quotes, for rural India, and about 2095 calories for urban India as the basic minimum food energy requirement. So, to conclude this part, the first thing that was there, and it has been in the basics, on the basis of the estimation that was provided by the ICMR's nutrition expert groups. Yeah, what should be the calorie or energy normative calorie, as they call it, or normative energy requirement, and that was translated based on age, sex, activity pattern of the India in early 80s. The estimated population that was used was 1983 in terms of the age composition of the population, age and sex composition of the population, and work population, because there are workers, something like those who work in the field, require something like 34 to 3800 calories per day, whereas sedentary workers require less than 2400. It was average for all India, and that's how the cost of this was calculated to be something like 49 rupees or something in rural areas and 56 rupees in urban areas. That is the poverty line that, in fact, even Tendulkar committee, as I am going to argue, did not change that. Basic argument of the Tendulkar committee does not deviate from it. And that has been the basis of the defining poverty line for India. This poverty line was all India, and therefore the estimates that were made available at that point in time for the poverty levels for India was, even though the estimates were for states, but the single poverty line was used. It was the next committee that was set up by Planning Commission again under the chairmanship of Lagdawala. They recommended that there is, in fact, there is just one bit of information here, that around 73, 74, that's the first time when they have used this task force, gave the poverty levels, almost all the states, that include Punjab and Orissa, there was a marginal difference across the state as far as the level of poverty is concerned. So there was, I mean, it was in the range of something like 55% or so, or slightly more. But the interstate differences were not that high. But later on, as the pace of development in different states was different, then there was this argument that, well, the different states have different levels of development now, and they have to have different state level poverty lines. And that's when Lagdawala addressed this issue by not re-estimating the poverty line, just arguing that what we can take care of, the state level poverty lines can be derived by just looking at the state-wise price differences. So it's all India poverty line for different states, and poverty line which was made available because of the price data availability was created only for 20 states and union territories, and among the union territories was Chandigarh and Delhi, and the rest of the other were states. And that poverty line till today continues. What happened during the 90s and early 2000s when the growth rate picked up, and suddenly the pace of poverty reduction picked up. And this is again the argument that growth is on an average is good for the poor, which a whole lot of economists now talk about. Whether it's, there are some major papers on growth poverty relationship, which it now includes pro-poorness of the growth, etc. That includes a whole lot of this host of World Bank economists, Martin Rebellion, and Dollar and Craig, Angus Deaton, and so many others. They have argued that look, this is the way life goes. Now, this is again was very much embedded in the National Development Agency's recommendation in 1930s. That they have argued that in order to have a serious dent on poverty, what we require is at least 500% increase or 5 times increase in the national wealth within a time horizon of 10 to 15 years. They were pragmatic people, and they also argued that, well, you can argue that to reduce poverty to almost zero, this is 500%, 5 times is required, but the trouble is that we don't have resources or anything to bring it down to that level of the growth, to achieve growth of 5 times increase the national wealth of 5 times within the period of 15 years. So they said, well, achievable is 200, that is doubling the national wealth, or at the most tripling it, 2.5, 3 times is what they have argued. Now that is what we have started experiencing for the first time starting 1990s, where the growth was sustained and it continued, and there has been incrementally higher growth. And the last decade, that is 2000s, has been probably the decade which has seen the highest historically observed growth rate in India, and in fact that is the record compared to several other countries. Now, because of that, what has happened, suddenly, although the poverty line, something like what Lakdawala Committee has done or what Y.K. Alag has done, started giving numbers which there are people, I mean, poverty became a business in this country. There are people who wanted, their survival depends on the number of poor that are there, and that is the political class of this country. And they haven't probably read the history, but what they do realize is more the number of poor, more the chances of their making money otherwise, and also being in the power implies. So this is this was something, the Lakdawala Committee poverty line that gives the poverty levels for 2004-05, which was about 28.5. Now the next committee, that Tendulkar Committee, was set up, and Professor Tendulkar, with all the regards and respect that I have for him, for some reason this is where he slipped really badly. He sat over this committee for 2.5 years, didn't do anything. Within the last 6 months, he came up with this simple formula. Take the urban poverty levels of 2004-05 as per the Lakdawala Committee, that was step 1. Corresponding to that, add some expenditure on health and education to be taken from somewhere else. So what is the average expenditure of a particular class of population, in this case the bottom 50% or bottom 60%. There are a couple of background papers that are there with the Lakdawala Committee, which one looks at the education expenditure and other looks at the out-of-pocket expenses on health. So on an average, that gets added on to that particular poverty line. So that becomes your urban poverty line. So essentially, it's Lakdawala Committee poverty line, which adds something like A as it's a poverty line, if we call it P, plus education expenditure E, and plus health expenditure H. So that becomes urban poverty line now for Tendulkar Committee. And then corresponding to that, create rural poverty line related to urban poverty line. Earlier, there are 3-4 papers by Angus Deaton. These papers were written with a very specific objective in mind, because when the reforms started, the government of India was on the back foot, and there was this whole group arguing that reforms are not good for the poor. In turn, what was being argued is growth is not good for the poor. So that was the time when Deaton came back and produced rural poverty lines and related to that urban poverty lines, and these relative prices, somehow it turned out where the criticism of our Angus Deaton lies is that the rural urban price differential that he gets out of the NSS data, that's what he has used, is exactly the same as Nikhilesh Bhattacharya and his colleagues have got in 1960s, that 17% rural urban price differential, which we all know is not the case. So, but in Tendulkar committee report, because this was known that if you base the poverty line on rural, urban poverty is going to go down drastically, and that's what has happened during the 1990s and the papers that came out during 1990s and early 2000. So there was a switch. Take the urban poverty line, related to urban poverty line, don't take the usual price indexes. The price indexes that were used in original Tendulkar committee report, they are based on actually what we call the Deaton type price index, where he has used unit values taken from the NSS unit level data, and these are the average or median values that he has, I think it's the median values that he has taken, which then is used to create an index and get the relative prices, because the rural poverty line in that sense turns out to be something like 18% lower than the urban poverty line when all these adjustments are done. So the two things that happened: one, original Lakdawala committee poverty line is part of Tendulkar committee poverty line. Out of it, pocket expenditure on health and average expenditure on education by the poor are at least bottom 50 or 60% has been added onto that, and the rural poverty line is derived based on that. Therefore, the re-estimated poverty levels for 93, 94, 2004-05 and now 11-12 are 2004-05 turned out to be 37% instead of less than 28%. So there is this difference of just about 11%. Around the same time, someone like me, we ended up using Lakdawala committee poverty line and re-estimating what would be the poverty levels. It turns out that what matters is the absolute value of poverty line as far as the level of poverty is concerned. In fact, if you can put this, there are a couple of graphs that I wanted to show along with the poverty line, and how these two poverty lines are related. Lakdawala using the methodology that he was using, and Tendulkar committee. So, to conclude here, first part, that is derivation of poverty line part, as of now, we do not have a poverty line for country. There is a committee that has been set up, not by the Planning Commission this time, but by the Prime Minister's office, because Planning Commission raised its hand and said nothing doing. We have a poverty line, Professor Tendulkar has submitted a report, and at the end of the day, Prime Minister has to intervene, and he set up the committee and the chairmanship of C. Rangarajan. He is now the new chair of a special group or committee that has been constituted to re-estimate the poverty line. It's in this memory stick. It's not coming. वे आपका भी आया ही नहीं।
म्यूजिक आ गया था। Tendulkar committee, when they came up with the first methodology type, they also took into consideration not this exchange rate, rather purchasing power parity.
No, it's done by for Indian prices and Indian population.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with.
Actually, when they compare it vis-a-vis United Nations or World Bank, $1, $1, $1, and 1.25 and
it's by actually it's by
chance.
chance.
They take this 16 rupees derived long back in 79 as $1, not based on the exchange rate, on purchasing power parity.
PPP, yeah.
And I think one thing which is very important there is, when you measure through purchasing power parity, it is not a US dollar, it's an international dollar which has nothing to do with the US dollar.
That's right.
And when you say $1 is equal to 16, that doesn't make a good comparison.
Let me first complete and then I'll take the questions on this. So, the point that I was making, that as of today, because of the massive or unprecedented growth since 90s that we have observed, whether it's pre-independence National Development Committee or today's economists or some of the best in the business who have been arguing that growth is absolutely important. So that part is guaranteed. In fact, at this stage, if we are going to slip on the growth front, then the trend that we have observed since 1990s, what I wanted to show was basically that forget about whether you are taking Lakdawala committee or Tendulkar committee, or even Surinder has referred to Dandekar and Rath committee poverty line. Take any three of these. The distribution is such that it's a log normal kind of distribution. Absolute value of our level of poverty may be different across the three poverty lines, but the change is not at all affected. I can tell you, I have calculated the numbers. In 11-12 that is released by Planning Commission now, the poverty levels come down by about 14 to 15 percentage points from 37 to 22, less than 20.
21.8.
Yeah. In our case, from 28 it comes down to 13.7 or 13.9. That is if I apply Lakdawala committee on the same distribution between 4, 5 and 11, 12, the rate of the absolute change is not too different. Whether it's rural, whether it's urban, and the same thing happened with APL. Not working, I'm sorry.
It is just no, basically which is, no, did you work out basically on the same poverty line which was estimated 374 for all the years?
That's right, yeah.
So what does it give? No, because no, once you do that, that is a part of the methodology. The other is a mockery of the methodology.
Which one?
Methodology is basically, you have given a method and you apply it any time when the data comes. Okay, not that then you link it with that and calculate the prices and then try to find it out. Because this basket of the consumption basket go on changing.
That I am coming to, sir. Let me complete. So this was the first part that we had as far as the derivation.
Relative price movement should also be taken into consideration.
They
From
have-
one time to the other.
They have to
Price
be.
relationships do not remain the same.
They have to be, but it depends on which time point
See,
you are
even by
comparing.
way of taking moving average, 3 years, 5 years, one could accommodate this relative price movement.
No, there are ways. There are the
Because if you
terms.
don't do that, that means you are measuring what change in the prices rather than changing the number of posts.
We are measuring change in the number of poors. If you have the same poverty line, if the if the expenditure data is collected at the current prices, what we need the poverty lines to be updated to the current prices.
Swept up.
So there is only one issue that comes in, and that has been very clearly argued by Lakdawala and his associate. In fact, Professor Tendulkar happens to be one of the key members of that. Tendulkar and Minhas, they have argued that, well, what we do is, that's a typical economics indifference curve analysis here, that if you are comparing, say, poverty levels between 83 and 93, then you cannot have the same weighting diagram for that takes care of your relative prices that was in 1973. So you have to have a weighting diagram fixed at one point in time, and well, the weighting diagram might have changed over the years, but you are comparing it starting at a particular point of time. So relative to 73, if there is no change in weighting diagram, that brings in a little bit of a problem there, or a little bit of deviation, but the usual trend is not going to change. So to conclude, the poverty line that we have, because the Tendulkar committee poverty line, it is a problematic in itself. It so happens that when it was derived in 2004-05, the Lakdawala committee poverty line in the rural area was about 70% of the Tendulkar committee, and urban poverty line was about 90% of the Tendulkar committee, that Lakdawala, the relationship between them. Now, in 11-12, there is increase in value of Lakdawala committee relative to Tendulkar. It is 75% of the Tendulkar committee poverty line, and urban poverty line is about 95%. So they are giving very similar results otherwise too, because of the inbuilt or inherent problem that this particular construction by Tendulkar had as far as the derivation of poverty line is concerned. Now coming back to linking this with the food security, the whole issue about 75%, as I have told right in the beginning, if we are looking at 75% population to be targeted, then why not 100%? So as far as food security is concern for everybody. Now, the first part is okay. It's a normative that everybody should have access to food and should be able to buy it. Now, this access part, the top 25% have done some crime in this country that they should not be provided with food. The trouble is that this is, as it is, whatever the schemes that we have, there is too much of wastage going on in every direction. So this is another colossal waste that is coming in. If at all we can find a way of taking care of something like bottom 30% of the population which does not have, or at least they are vulnerable. As far as their access to food is concerned, Professor Sidhu has already pointed out that households themselves, when they identify what is their food intake, only about 2.5% are still not able to get these 2 square meals, what Surendra was referring to as being part of the self-perceived poor. So from 2.5%, and if we take the old poverty line of Dawala, it is around 13-14%. So in total, it should not be more than bottom 20%, which are really vulnerable. Next 10% could be sort of transitory vulnerable, and that's where the food security issue should be focused rather than taking it to 75% or something. And that's all that I had to say. Thank you so much.
Is there any possibility that this BPL card it can be used for reservation purposes also?
You are asking a question.
I am asking you a question. It's not it's not a nasty question. I am asking, first they will use it for providing different kind of subsidies. Gradually they will take it to reservation fund.
Well, I don't see the future in that sense. There are too many other issues involved with reservation. There are other groups which are
See, I'm not talking about
arguing about
job
reservation.
reservations. It's about the subsidies and the dispensation of other state, other facilities, welfare state facilities.
See,
So why, if you can use what you call your this data card, Pranaya Sharma, use this one also.
You can use it, there's no problem with that.
See, the only problem is Haryana, they had to draw 1,47,000 BPL cards. So in Punjab.
पैसे दे जाएंगे कि शराब पिया जाए
नहीं एक और issue
Now the
that's not a part of consumption of the household. How can you deny household? We are giving you money, don't drink with it.
अच्छा, the second part, would you ever revise this list also? When they will be revisited? When they will be eliminated? Some of them who become rich.
Yes, poverty,
Yeah, this is-
graphs are not supporting.
poverty
Increased. 90% to 95% urban has increased. The reason, if you want to know, is that in case of they have done something what is known as quick and dirty job. They picked up Tendulkar Committee poverty line, used the price indexes that we have used in OPF or Lakdawala Committee poverty line, updated it. Creating it is a tricky business using the what we call unit values. Now, unit values as such, the second thing that I wanted to argue was telling you this doesn't include 2011-12 by the way, because it requires a little more work and I've been a bit lazy these days. So this is the distribution that you have. Take whatever poverty line you want, and it is constant prices, 93, 94 prices. So whatever the poverty line you take, you put it, if the poverty line is on the right, that is if P1 is greater than P2, then the poverty level should be with P2 would be greater than P1. But as far as the change is concerned, as the way the distribution is shifting from left to right, the change in terms of over time is not going to affect it hugely. I mean, it will get affected by half a percentage point or a percentage point, but not that much. This is a case with rural, and the similar graph we find in urban. Urban, the inequality part is becoming much more important in urban, where you can see the extreme 1200 onwards. It's jumping like anything. So that's where, and in fact, between 93 and 2011 to about 2009-10, the inequality has increased quite substantially. And that's all that I had to say. Thank you.
Small pension.
Yeah. No, they are not consumer objects. It's a macro view of what should be guide the
They
policy.
are basically no, they have to be basically seen who are these people. No, that is what is to be identified, and that is the whole problem. There is nothing wrong. What I am asking is, as per methodology,
Manjeet,
as
it's the poor people who have made the country poor.
That is who articulate and is not among left wing.
Harvas, I have one question.
May I ask
Basically,
Dr. Samarji
हाँ,
Sidhu to
मैं एक सवाल तो पूछूंगा यार पहले
सवाल पूछ लो यार।
नहीं let me clear basically the calorie norms, then what happens? So that's why they shut the calorie norms also.
No, that's not the issue. The issue is that, in fact, there is another paper that I have done, it's not yet published, where we looked at the caloric calorie intake or normative calorie or calorie norm is specified based on the structure of the population, workforce structure and so on. What if we retain the normative or norm that was recommended in 1968 and re-estimate what would be the current requirement of the calorie? It so happens that it is going down.
No, how many of them basically can be termed as?
those categories.
Huh?
You don't have those categories.
No, they don't need that actually.
See, sources are not the same.
Yeah.
Sources of calorie, they are not the same. They are methodology.
Yeah, that's
There is
right.
a lot of change in the consumption basket.
Yeah, that's right. That is what
that
should come out.
we
Anyway, I think we should move on.
No, otherwise